What if the real reason your reality won't shift has nothing to do with destiny, luck, or not wanting it badly enough, and everything to do with how your brain and your energetic field respond to comfort? Think about it. How many times have you felt inspired, even electrified, after hearing a powerful idea about manifestation, and then, the next morning, you woke up and returned to the same habits, the same doubts, the same invisible gravity pulling you back? Why does that happen so consistently? And more importantly, what if that pattern isn't a character flaw, but a predictable system you can finally outsmart? Here's the open loop most people never close. The universe may respond to frequency, but your frequency is stabilized by biology. Your identity is not just a belief. It's a neurological default reinforced by repetition. And if your default wiring is trained to avoid discomfort, it will quietly sabotage any intention that threatens the familiar. So the real question becomes, how do you create a fast turning point, one that doesn't rely on motivation, mood, or willpower? The answer is not more affirmations, not more vision boards, not even more positive thinking. The answer is to create a measurable shift in your internal state early, decisively, and on purpose, so your brain stops treating change like danger and starts treating it like control. In the next topic, I'll show you the first lever: why the simple desire to change is already evidence of untapped potential, and how to use that desire as the ignition, not the frustration. Wanting change means you're already ahead. Why does the desire to change keep showing up in your life, even when part of you feels tired, skeptical, or discouraged? And why do some people never ask this question at all? Here is a truth most never hear. The urge to change is not weakness, it is evidence. In quantum terms, desire is not random. It is the conscious perception of a potential that already exists within your field. You do not desire what is impossible for you. You desire what is latent. If someone feels no inner friction, no dissatisfaction, no quiet hunger for more clarity, more abundance, more emotional stability, it is usually because their identity is fully matched to their current results. But when you feel the tension between where you are and where you sense you could be, that tension is information. It signals that your internal frequency has begun to outgrow its current expression. This is where most people misinterpret the signal. They assume desire means lack. In reality, desire means misalignment between identity and capacity. You are no longer congruent with the version of yourself that produced your current life. Neuroscience supports this. The brain only generates sustained desire when it detects a discrepancy between the present state and a higher internal reference model. In simple terms, your system already knows you can operate at a higher level. This is why suppressing desire, numbing it with distractions, or judging yourself for wanting more only prolongs stagnation. Desire is not the enemy. Avoidance is. The real question is not, why do I want to change? The real question is, what part of me already knows I'm capable of more, and how do I prove it today, not someday? That proof does not begin with thought. It begins with action. If this perspective resonates, subscribe to the channel and like this video. These insights build step by step, and the next shift may depend on what you hear next. Commitment as a neurological and energetic threshold. Why does real change so often begin the moment someone says, "That's it. I'm done living this way," and not a second earlier? What actually shifts in that instant? Commitment is not a motivational concept. It is a threshold event. From the perspective of neuroscience, commitment signals the brain that uncertainty has ended. Until that moment, your nervous system treats change as optional, negotiable, and therefore unsafe. The threat system remains active, scanning for reasons to delay, soften, or abandon action. But when commitment becomes explicit, especially when it is stated clearly and publicly, the brain receives a very different message. This is no longer hypothetical. This is why rituals of commitment exist across every serious transformation tradition, from ancient initiations to modern behavioral therapy. A clear declaration restructures priorities inside the brain. It reduces cognitive ambivalence and reallocates energy toward execution rather than debate. Energetically, the same principle applies. Reality responds less to desire and more to coherence. When your intention, language, and action align into a single direction, interference drops. You stop emitting mixed signals. Commitment collapses probability. This is also why half commitment produces exhaustion. When part of you wants change and another part is negotiating comfort, your system burns energy without traction. The universe mirrors that contradiction precisely. True commitment is not dramatic. It is clean. It does not depend on emotion. It does not wait for confidence. It is simply a decision that removes the option to retreat. Notice the difference between I'll try and I commit. One invites negotiation. The other ends it. In the next topic, you'll understand why this works at such a deep level by breaking down the two core systems that govern all human behavior: the brain's reward system and its threat system. Two systems secretly running your life. What if nearly every decision you make, especially the ones that shape your future, is being filtered through just two internal systems you were never taught to recognize? At the neurological level, human behavior is governed primarily by two core mechanisms: the threat system and the reward system. Everything else, logic, planning, intention, operates after these systems give permission. The threat system exists to keep you alive. It scans constantly for uncertainty, discomfort, rejection, and loss of control. Importantly, it does not distinguish between physical danger and psychological risk. A hard conversation, financial exposure, discipline, or the possibility of failure can activate it just as strongly as real danger. When this system is active, your brain prioritizes avoidance. Clarity narrows. Creativity drops. Long-term thinking shuts down. The body prepares not to build, but to escape. The reward system, on the other hand, governs motivation. It releases dopamine not as a pleasure chemical, but as a signal that effort is worth it. When aligned correctly, it fuels focus, persistence, and learning. When misaligned, it becomes hijacked by shortcuts. Here is the problem most people face. Modern life overstimulates the reward system with low-effort rewards while simultaneously keeping the threat system chronically activated. The result is paralysis masked as procrastination. From an energetic standpoint, this creates incoherence. You may consciously want expansion, but your nervous system is broadcasting caution. The universe reflects the stronger signal, which is usually the unconscious one. This is why affirmations often fail. You cannot override a threat response with words alone. You must first reorganize the nervous system's hierarchy. In the next topic, you'll see why self-sabotage is not a moral flaw or a lack of discipline, but a predictable neurological pattern, and why understanding this changes everything about how you approach transformation. Self-sabotage is not a personal failure. Why do intelligent, capable people repeatedly block their own progress, even when they know exactly what to do? Why does procrastination appear right at the moment action matters most? Because self-sabotage is not a character issue. It is a neurological response. When the brain perceives a situation as threatening, financial exposure, emotional vulnerability, sustained effort, it activates protective circuits designed to reduce risk. These circuits are ancient, automatic, and fast. They operate long before conscious reasoning enters the picture. From the brain's perspective, inaction is safety. This is why willpower fails. Willpower tries to override biology. But biology always wins when threatened. The moment discomfort rises, the nervous system looks for relief, not results. Avoidance, distraction, and comfort-seeking are not laziness. They are emergency exits installed by evolution. The problem is that the modern world constantly triggers these exits without providing real danger. Energetically, this creates a loop of contraction. You intend expansion, but your system is broadcasting withdrawal. Reality mirrors the stronger signal, the one rooted in survival, not growth. Understanding this changes everything. Instead of fighting yourself, you begin working with your wiring. Instead of judging resistance, you recognize it as a signal. Your threat system is in control. And here's the crucial insight. You don't eliminate self-sabotage by pushing harder. You dissolve it by shifting which system is dominant. Once the reward system is re-educated to associate effort with safety and control, resistance collapses naturally. Action stops feeling like danger and starts feeling stabilizing. In the next topic, you'll understand why knowledge alone never creates change, and why most people are stuck not because they lack information, but because information does not reprogram the nervous system. Knowing what to do changes almost nothing. If information were enough, wouldn't the world already look very different? Why do so many people understand finances, health, productivity, and even manifestation, yet live as if they don't? Because knowledge speaks to the conscious mind, while behavior is governed by the subconscious nervous system. Your brain does not execute what you know. It executes what it has been trained to repeat. This is why insight can feel empowering in the moment and irrelevant the next day. Insight excites the intellect, but it does not rewrite the operating system. Neuroscience is clear on this point. Behavior is driven by pattern, not logic. The brain prioritizes what feels familiar over what feels optimal. Familiarity equals safety. Even an unpleasant routine can feel safer than an unfamiliar improvement. This is why people return to habits they actively dislike. The nervous system is not seeking happiness, it is seeking predictability. From an energetic perspective, repetition stabilizes frequency. Whatever you repeat emotionally, physically, and mentally becomes your baseline signal to reality. That signal does not change because you understand something. It changes only when repetition changes. This is also why affirmations fail when they contradict lived behavior. If your words say one thing but your actions repeat another, the nervous system believes the actions. Reality follows the dominant pattern. Real transformation requires a mechanism that interrupts repetition and replaces it with a new reference point, one the brain can trust. That mechanism must be physical, immediate, and undeniable. In the next topic, you'll discover the misunderstood role of dopamine, not as a pleasure chemical, but as the engine of motivation, and why effort, not comfort, is what actually rewires the system. Dopamine, the engine behind lasting change. What if the very chemical most people chase for pleasure is actually designed for something entirely different? And what if misunderstanding dopamine is one of the biggest reasons manifestation and personal change fail? Dopamine is often described as the feel-good chemical, but that is an oversimplification. Dopamine is not released to reward comfort. It is released to reinforce effort. Its real function is to motivate pursuit, learning, and persistence in the face of challenge. Neuroscience shows that the most stable and long-lasting dopamine release occurs not when you receive a reward, but when you overcome resistance to get it. The anticipation of effort, especially when paired with progress, creates a powerful motivational loop. This explains something crucial: why easy pleasures feel good briefly but leave you depleted, while disciplined effort often feels uncomfortable at first but generates confidence, clarity, and momentum afterward. When dopamine is trained through effort, the brain begins to associate challenge with safety and reward. Motivation becomes self-sustaining. You no longer need external stimulation to act. Energetically, this shifts your signal to reality. You stop emitting the frequency of avoidance and start broadcasting agency. Reality responds accordingly by presenting opportunities instead of obstacles. Most people reverse this system. They flood the brain with effortless dopamine from stimulation, distraction, and instant gratification. Over time, the reward system weakens. Motivation drops. Action feels heavy. This is not a moral failure. It is a training outcome. The good news is that dopamine pathways are highly adaptable. You can retrain them quickly if you know where to apply pressure. In the next topic, you'll see how cheap dopamine quietly creates dependency and stagnation, and why eliminating it is not about discipline, but about restoring neurological balance. The hidden cost of cheap dopamine. Why does modern life feel so stimulating, yet so draining? Why are distractions everywhere, yet motivation feels increasingly rare? The answer lies in what neuroscience calls cheap dopamine. Cheap dopamine comes from activities that deliver immediate reward with minimal effort. Endless scrolling, sugar, binge-watching, pornography, constant notifications, impulsive spending, and even chronic procrastination disguised as planning. These behaviors flood the reward system without requiring challenge, focus, or growth. At first, this feels like relief. But neurologically, it carries a cost. When dopamine is released too easily and too frequently, the brain adapts by reducing sensitivity. The baseline drops. Tasks that once felt manageable now feel heavy. Discipline feels painful. Focus becomes fragmented. Motivation no longer rises when needed. This creates a dangerous loop. Low motivation leads to avoidance. Avoidance seeks cheap dopamine. Cheap dopamine weakens motivation further. Energetically, this loop contracts your field. You may visualize expansion, abundance, or clarity, but your nervous system is signaling dependency and retreat. Reality responds with repetition, not elevation. Here is the critical insight. Cheap dopamine does not relax the brain. It agitates it. The nervous system never truly rests because stimulation keeps it reactive. True rest comes from regulated effort, not endless pleasure. This is why people feel exhausted after doing nothing. Breaking this cycle is not about removing pleasure from life. It is about restoring the correct order. Effort first, reward second. Once effort becomes the gateway to dopamine again, the system stabilizes. Focus returns. Emotional volatility decreases. Action becomes lighter. In the next topic, you'll understand why social rejection, criticism, and judgment feel so paralyzing, and how social pain silently reinforces avoidance at a neurological level. Social pain stops you before you even try. Why does a critical comment linger longer than praise? Why does the fear of being judged, rejected, or misunderstood stop so many people from taking decisive action, even when the action could change their life? Because to your brain, Social pain is not symbolic. It is physical. Neuroscience shows that social rejection activates the same neural circuits as physical injury. The brain does not register exclusion, criticism, or humiliation as emotional concepts. It registers them as threats to survival. Historically, being rejected from the group meant death. Your nervous system still carries that memory. This explains why visibility feels dangerous, why speaking up, raising your standards, charging more, setting boundaries, or committing publicly can trigger anxiety disproportionate to the situation itself. The threat system interprets exposure as risk. It whispers, "Stay quiet, stay small, stay safe." When this system dominates, the body prepares for withdrawal. Muscles tighten. Breathing becomes shallow. Thinking narrows. You delay, soften, or abandon action, not because you lack courage, but because your biology is prioritizing belonging over growth. Energetically, this creates a powerful interference. You may consciously desire expansion, but unconsciously fear the consequences of being seen in a new role. The signal becomes mixed. Reality responds with hesitation, not momentum. This is also why public commitment is so powerful. When you choose visibility intentionally, you reframe exposure from threat to agency. The brain begins to associate being seen with control rather than danger. Avoidance feeds the fear. Action dissolves it. In the next topic, you'll see how avoidance, when combined with cheap dopamine, creates a vicious neurological loop that drains motivation and keeps potential permanently unexpressed. The avoidance loop that quietly steals your power. Why does putting something off bring temporary relief, yet leave you feeling weaker afterward? Why does avoidance feel soothing in the moment, but corrosive over time? Because avoidance is not neutral. It trains your nervous system. When you avoid a task that carries discomfort, your threat system interprets that avoidance as success. The brain learns. Escape works. Dopamine is released, not for progress, but for relief. This reinforces the behavior. But here is the hidden cost. Each time you avoid, the perceived threat grows. The task feels heavier next time. Confidence erodes. Mental friction increases. The system becomes more reactive, not calmer. This creates a closed loop. Discomfort appears, avoidance reduces tension, cheap dopamine rewards avoidance, motivation weakens, discomfort increases, avoidance becomes automatic. From the outside, this looks like procrastination. From the inside, it feels like exhaustion, confusion, and self-doubt. Energetically, this loop stabilizes stagnation. Your field adapts to contraction. Opportunities may still appear, but they feel overwhelming, poorly timed, or not for you. The universe does not punish avoidance. It reflects it. Breaking this loop requires a counterintuitive move. You must interrupt avoidance before comfort arrives. That means acting while resistance is still present. This is where most advice fails. It tells you to wait for motivation, confidence, or clarity. But those are consequences of action, not prerequisites. Once you experience control in the presence of discomfort, the loop reverses. Dopamine becomes associated with agency instead of escape. Motivation rebuilds naturally. In the next topic, you'll understand why motivation and pleasure are not the same thing, and why confusing them keeps people trapped in cycles of effortless stagnation. Motivation has nothing to do with pleasure. Why do the most comfortable routines often lead to dissatisfaction, while effort, when chosen deliberately, creates confidence and stability? And why do so many people wait to feel like it before acting, only to wait forever? Because motivation and pleasure are governed by different mechanisms. Pleasure is reactive. It soothes, distracts, or entertains. It feels good in the moment, but requires repetition to maintain its effect. Motivation, on the other hand, is proactive. It arises when the brain detects progress, mastery, and control. Neuroscience shows that motivation is not triggered by comfort. It is triggered by movement toward a goal in the presence of effort. When you act despite resistance, the reward system activates, not to celebrate ease, but to reinforce capability. This is why pleasure without effort leads to emptiness, while effort without pleasure often leads to pride. One stabilizes nothing. The other stabilizes identity. Energetically, this distinction is crucial. Pleasure maintains the current frequency. Motivation elevates it. If you seek expansion while prioritizing comfort, your signal contradicts your desire. This misunderstanding explains why people burn out on inspiration. They chase the emotional high of feeling motivated instead of creating the conditions that generate motivation organically. Motivation does not arrive first. It follows action. Once this is understood, waiting becomes unnecessary. You no longer ask, "Do I feel ready?" You ask, "What action will reorganize my state right now?" In the next topic, you'll be introduced to the core technique that applies all of this knowledge into a single, precise intervention, one that uses discomfort strategically to reverse the entire system. Hedonic inversion, using discomfort as a lever. What if the fastest way to regain control over your life was to do the one thing you've been trained to avoid, on purpose, and first? This is the principle known as hedonic inversion. Instead of structuring your day around comfort and slowly negotiating effort, you reverse the order. You intentionally begin your day with the most uncomfortable constructive task you usually delay. Not reckless discomfort, not punishment, but focused, meaningful effort. Neurologically, this is a powerful disruption. When you face discomfort early, the threat system activates, but then quickly deactivates when no harm follows. The brain learns something critical. Discomfort is survivable. Control is restored. Dopamine is released not as relief, but as mastery. This creates a chemical contrast. Once the hardest task is complete, everything else feels lighter. Focus improves. Emotional reactivity drops. Decisions become cleaner. Energetically, hedonic inversion signals sovereignty. You are no longer reacting to life, you are initiating. This collapses resistance and increases coherence across thought, emotion, and action. Most high performers apply this unknowingly. Early intense exercise, cold exposure, deep work before distractions. These are all forms of hedonic inversion. The power is not in the activity, it is in the sequence. By choosing effort first, you retrain your nervous system to associate discomfort with safety and reward. This is not willpower. It is conditioning. In the next topic, you'll see precisely why this works at the neurological level and how early discomfort reorganizes both the threat and reward systems permanently. Early discomfort rewires the brain. Why does doing the hard thing first seem to unlock clarity, energy, and focus for the rest of the day? And why does delaying it drain you, even before you begin? Because timing changes chemistry. When discomfort is faced early, the threat system prepares for danger, but then receives corrective feedback. Nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. The anticipated pain does not materialize. This updates the brain's predictive model. In neuroscience, this is called prediction error. The brain expected threat and received safety. That discrepancy forces rewiring. As a result, the threat system quiets. The nervous system shifts from defense to regulation. Dopamine is released not as escape, but as reinforcement of control and competence. This is why early effort feels stabilizing rather than exhausting. You are not spending the day bracing for something unpleasant. The psychological weight is gone. Energetically, this creates dominance over your internal state. Instead of broadcasting hesitation or delay, your field communicates decisiveness. Reality responds with flow instead of friction. There is also a compounding effect. When the brain experiences control early, it treats subsequent tasks as extensions of success rather than new threats. Focus deepens. Emotional volatility decreases. cognitive bandwidth expands. Importantly, this effect does not require intensity. It requires non-negotiation. The act must be done before debate begins. This is why "I'll do it later" weakens you, while "I do it now" strengthens you, even if the task is small. In the next topic, you'll understand how this creates chemical contrast that makes the entire day feel lighter, and why this contrast is essential for sustained motivation. Chemical contrast and the lightness that follows. Why does the rest of the day often feel easier after you complete one difficult task? And why does everything feel heavier when that task is postponed? The answer is chemical contrast. When the brain encounters discomfort and resolves it through action, it recalibrates its internal baseline. Effort becomes the reference point. Compared to that effort, subsequent tasks register as less demanding, even if they are objectively challenging. This is not psychological illusion. It is neurochemical recalibration. Early effort elevates dopamine sensitivity. The reward system becomes responsive again. Focus increases without stimulation. Decisions feel simpler. Emotional noise drops. In contrast, when discomfort is delayed, the brain spends energy anticipating pain. Cortisol rises. Attention fragments. Even simple tasks feel disproportionately taxing. Energetically, contrast expands perception. You stop interpreting life through resistance and start interpreting it through capability. This shifts your signal from survival to agency. This is why people who begin their day with effort often describe a sense of calm confidence, not excitement, but steadiness. They are no longer managing internal friction. Chemical contrast also protects against impulsive behavior. When the reward system is satisfied through effort, the pull of cheap dopamine weakens. You become less reactive, more intentional. Importantly, this effect is cumulative. Each day you create contrast, your nervous system expects competence rather than avoidance. Motivation becomes quieter, but stronger. In the next topic, you'll see how this sense of control restores clarity and emotional stability, and why control, not comfort, is the foundation of sustainable success. Control restores clarity and emotional stability. Why does life feel overwhelming when you feel out of control, even if nothing objectively terrible is happening? And why does a single decisive action often restore calm faster than rest or distraction? Because the nervous system does not seek comfort. It seeks control. When the brain perceives control, the threat system deactivates. Cortisol drops. Attention widens. The body exits survival mode and re-enters regulation. This is when clarity returns, not because problems disappeared, but because your system is no longer bracing for impact. Control is not dominance over circumstances. It is authorship over response. Neuroscience shows that perceived control is one of the strongest buffers against anxiety and emotional instability. Even small acts of intentional action, when chosen deliberately, signal safety to the brain. This is why hedonic inversion is so powerful. By choosing effort before avoidance, you send a clear internal message: I decide. That single message reorganizes your internal hierarchy. Energetically, control collapses noise. You stop broadcasting confusion, hesitation, or dependency. Your field becomes coherent. Reality responds not by eliminating challenge, but by making challenge navigable. This also explains why stimulants, motivation hacks, and external pressure eventually fail. They simulate control without restoring it. Once they wear off, instability returns. True control is quiet. It does not need excitement. It creates steadiness. In the next topic, You'll understand why this process is not about willpower and why using willpower actually reinforces the very patterns you are trying to break. This is reprogramming, not willpower. Why does forcing yourself eventually lead to burnout, while strategic action creates momentum? And why do people who rely on willpower often feel like they are constantly fighting themselves? Because willpower works against the nervous system, while reprogramming works with it. Willpower assumes that the conscious mind is in charge. Neuroscience shows the opposite. Conscious intention represents a tiny fraction of behavioral control. The subconscious nervous system governs energy allocation, threat detection, and habit execution. When you rely on willpower, you create internal conflict. One part of you pushes forward, while another pulls back to preserve safety and comfort. This friction drains energy and reinforces resistance. Reprogramming does something entirely different. It changes the brain's expectations through experience. Hedonic inversion is effective because it does not argue with resistance, it disproves it. Each time you act despite discomfort and nothing bad happens, the threat system updates its model. Effort stops being categorized as danger. This is how habits truly change, not through repetition alone, but through corrected predictions. Energetically, this is the difference between forcing reality and aligning with it. Willpower emits strain. Reprogramming emits coherence. Reality reflects coherence. This is also why change feels lighter when done correctly. You are no longer pushing uphill. The slope is changing beneath you. Importantly, reprogramming happens fast. The brain adapts quickly to new evidence. A few decisive experiences outweigh years of intellectual understanding. In the next topic, you'll see how many high performers unknowingly apply this principle and why discipline works not because of personality, but because of structure. High performers seem disciplined without effort. Why do certain people appear naturally disciplined, consistent, and focused, while others struggle just to get started? Is it personality, genetics, or something more precise? It is structure. High performers rarely rely on motivation. They rely on environments and sequences that remove negotiation. Early wake-ups, cold exposure, intense exercise, focused work blocks. These are not acts of toughness. They are neurological shortcuts. Each of these practices applies hedonic inversion automatically. Discomfort is placed first. The threat system is confronted early and deactivated through action. Control is established before distractions arrive. Once that happens, the rest of the day unfolds with less resistance. This is why disciplined people often describe their routines as grounding rather than exhausting. Their nervous systems are trained to associate effort with stability. Energetically, these routines create a consistent signal. There is no contradiction between intention and behavior. Reality mirrors that coherence with opportunity and momentum. This also explains why copying surface habits without understanding the mechanism often fails. The power is not in waking early or working hard. It is in removing choice at the moment of resistance. Structure replaces willpower. When the system expects action, action feels normal. When it expects negotiation, negotiation becomes endless. In the next topic, you'll learn how to apply this principle deliberately, step by step, without overhauling your life or relying on extreme routines. How to apply the method without overhauling your life. What if real transformation didn't require changing everything at once? What if a single, precise intervention was enough to restart momentum? This is where most people either overcomplicate the process or abandon it entirely. Hedonic inversion works best when it is specific, contained, and non-negotiable. It is not about becoming extreme. It is about becoming precise. Step 1 is choosing the right task. It must meet 3 criteria. It should feel uncomfortable. It should be constructive. And it should be something you usually avoid. Not the hardest task imaginable, just the one that reliably triggers resistance. Step 2 is timing. The task must be done immediately after waking, before stimulation, before messages, before analysis. The brain is most plastic in the morning. Delay invites negotiation. Negotiation reactivates the threat system. Step 3 is execution without commentary. No affirmations. No internal debate. No waiting to feel ready. The act itself is the signal. Step 4 is observation. After completion, notice how your decision-making shifts, how focus improves, how emotional reactivity drops. This awareness reinforces learning at the neurological level. Step 5 is tracking. Writing brief notes about mood, clarity, and energy anchors the new reference point. The brain trusts data it can observe. Energetically, this process is clean. You are not forcing belief. You are generating evidence. The power of this method is not in intensity, it is in consistency. One small act, repeated daily, compounds faster than dramatic but inconsistent effort. In the next topic, you'll see how repeating this process for just 7 days can break inertia completely and why momentum accelerates faster than you expect once the loop is reversed. 7 days are enough to break inertia. Why does change often feel impossible until suddenly it feels inevitable? And why do short, structured challenges create more momentum than vague long-term goals? Because inertia is not permanent. It is maintained. In neuroscience, momentum builds through repetition with feedback. When the brain experiences the same successful pattern several days in a row, it begins to treat that pattern as the new normal. This is why a 7-day window is so effective. It is long enough to rewire expectation, but short enough to avoid overwhelm. Each day you apply hedonic inversion, 3 things happen simultaneously. First, the threat system weakens its prediction of danger. Second, the reward system relearns that effort leads to stability. Third, your identity begins to update, not conceptually but behaviorally. By day 3 or 4, most people notice a subtle shift. Resistance appears later, feels quieter, and holds less authority. By day 7, action begins to feel familiar rather than forced. Energetically, repetition stabilizes frequency. You are no longer sending mixed signals. The field becomes coherent. This is when synchronicities, opportunities, and clarity often appear, not as magic, but as perception expanding once internal noise drops. The challenge is not about intensity. It is about continuity. Missing a day reopens negotiation. Completing each day closes it. This is also why motivation accelerates after action, not before it. Once the system expects follow-through, confidence emerges naturally. You stop asking, "Can I do this?" and start assuming, "This is what I do." In the next topic, you'll understand this final shift, why motivation always follows action, and how waiting for motivation is the most reliable way to remain stuck. Motivation is the result, not the cause. Why do people wait to feel motivated before acting, when action itself is what creates motivation? And how did this reversal become so widely misunderstood? Because motivation feels emotional and action feels mechanical. Most people assume emotion must come first. Neuroscience shows the opposite. Motivation is generated after movement toward a goal begins. The brain evaluates effort, progress, and control, then releases dopamine to reinforce continuation. No movement, no motivation. This explains why thinking, planning, and visualizing often feel productive but lead nowhere. They stimulate intention without triggering the systems that produce drive. Energetically, this misunderstanding keeps people trapped in potential. They imagine expansion but remain stationary. Reality mirrors the stillness, not the vision. Once action precedes emotion, the entire dynamic shifts. You no longer negotiate with your internal state. You use action to reorganize it. This is the defining difference between people who change their lives and those who study change endlessly. One group waits to feel ready. The other uses readiness as a consequence. Motivation is not something you summon. It is something you earn through engagement. In the final topic, you'll see how to seal this process, so it doesn't remain a technique, but becomes a long-term shift supported by structure, community, and continued reprogramming. From technique to identity, making the shift permanent. What if this process was never meant to be a temporary tool, but a doorway into a new identity? And what if the real transformation begins only when the technique stops feeling like a technique? This is the final and most important shift. At first, hedonic inversion feels intentional. You choose discomfort consciously. You apply structure deliberately. But over time, something deeper happens. Your identity updates. The brain does not store identity as a belief. It stores it as a pattern of behavior. Once a behavior is repeated enough times without negative consequence, it becomes self-referential. You no longer think, I am doing this. You think, this is who I am. This is where most people either lock in change or lose it. If the practice remains isolated, unsupported, or treated as a short experiment, the old environment slowly pulls you back. But when structure, community, and continuity are introduced, the nervous system stabilizes the new pattern. Neuroscience shows that social reinforcement accelerates identity consolidation. When others witness your commitment, or when you align with people who normalize disciplined action, the brain categorizes the behavior as safe, expected, and permanent. Energetically, this is coherence at its highest level. Thought, emotion, action, and environment align. Reality stops resisting because there is no longer internal contradiction. You are no longer trying to manifest change. You are operating from it. This is the real promise of co-creation. Not wishful thinking. Not endless techniques. But identity-driven resonance. Once identity shifts, results follow naturally, without strain, obsession, or burnout. Effort remains, but resistance dissolves. When you understand this, the question is no longer, can I change? The question becomes, how long will I continue living as someone I have already outgrown? This is the moment where choice becomes destiny. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Like this video, leave your comment below, and share it with someone who's ready for real change. Your voice matters, and engaging here helps this work reach those who need it most.